Leslie Howard was one of Britain's most recognizable actors of the 1930s and early 1940s, celebrated for his roles in The Scarlet Pimpernel and Gone with the Wind. Beyond his screen presence, Howard became an intellectual figurehead for Britain's wartime propaganda, using his voice in films to rally Allied morale. He could have remained safely in Hollywood, but he chose duty over comfort, returning to Europe to support his homeland. In June 1943, while flying from Lisbon to London, his civilian plane, WWII Flight 777, was intercepted by German fighters and shot down over the Bay of Biscay. Everyone on board was killed, and conspiracy theories suggested the Nazis may have deliberately targeted him. Though his body was never recovered, Howard's name lives on in memorials at Runnymede, England. His story reminds us how even artists, far from the battlefield, could become casualties of war. Basil Hallam, known for his charming comic character Gilbert the Filbert, was a rising star of Edwardian stage and film before the First World War. He captivated audiences with light comedy, music hall routines, and stage performances that reflected Britain's pre-war optimism. At the outbreak of war, Hallam joined the Royal Flying Corps, where he was trained as an observer in kite balloons used for spotting enemy positions. On August 20, 1916, tragedy struck during the Battle of the Somme. His balloon was hit and broke free, drifting helplessly before collapsing. Hallam was killed in the fall. He was just 32 years old. Buried in Lillers Communal Cemetery in France, his grave is still tended by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Hallam's death illustrates how the war reached into every layer of society, extinguishing the life of a beloved entertainer at the very height of his career. Robert Lenin became a national treasure in France as the red-haired child star of Poil de Carotte, 1932. His naturalistic performance touched audiences and made him the symbol of youthful French cinema in the 1930s. As he grew older, Lenin continued to act, balancing his career with patriotic duties when his country was drawn into the storm of World War II. When France fell under German occupation, Lenin joined the resistance, putting himself at enormous risk. In 1943, he was arrested by the Gestapo for his underground work. After brutal imprisonment and interrogation, he was executed by firing squad on April 1, 1944. He was only 23. Today, Lenin rests in Cimetière de Montmartre in Paris, where admirers still pay tribute. His grave tells the story of a youth stolen too soon, and of an actor who chose loyalty to his country over the safety of fame. Luisa Ferida was one of Italy's most glamorous actresses of the late 1930s and early 1940s. Known for her roles in melodramas and historical epics, she embodied the allure of Italian cinema under Mussolini's regime. Alongside her partner Osvaldo Valenti, she starred in films that entertained audiences even as the world around them collapsed. But fame during wartime Italy carried dangerous associations. In 1945, with fascism falling, Ferida and Valenti were accused of collaborating with the regime. Though their exact involvement remains debated, they were arrested by partisans in Milan. On April 30, 1945, the couple was executed by firing squad. Ferida was only 31 years old. Her grave lies in Milan's Cimitero Maggiore, where admirers still leave flowers. Ferida's tragic end reflects how war blurred lines between art, politics, and survival, leaving her legacy complicated, yet undeniably tragic. Osvaldo Valenti was among Italy's most striking leading men, a dashing presence in films of the 1930s and early 1940s. He partnered both professionally and romantically with Luisa Ferida, making them one of cinema's most recognizable couples. As Italy fell deeper into wartime chaos, Valenti's career became entangled with politics, particularly through associations with fascist officials. When Mussolini's rule collapsed, those ties sealed his fate. In April 1945, he and Ferida were captured by partisans in Milan. On April 30th, both were executed, accused of collaboration and wartime atrocities. Though their exact guilt has been disputed by historians, their deaths were swift and final. Valenti was buried beside Ferida in Milan's Cimitero Maggiore. His story highlights how actors, thrust into the theater of history, could become symbols of a nation's reckoning, remembered not just for their art, but for the choices made in desperate times. Harry Baur was one of France's greatest actors of the 1930s, famed for his commanding performances in Les Miserables, 1934, and Crime et Châtiment, 1935. His imposing figure and deep voice made him a fixture of European cinema. But with the German occupation of France, his career and life took a darker turn. In 1942, Baur appeared in a film co-produced with Nazi Germany, which exposed him to suspicion. The Gestapo soon arrested him, accusing him of being Jewish and politically unreliable. He was tortured in prison, and though eventually released, his health was irreparably broken. On April 21, 1943, Harry Baur died in Paris at only 55 years old. He was buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery, where admirers still visit his grave. His tragic end reminds us that even the most celebrated artists were not spared from the paranoia and brutality of wartime occupation. Kurt Gerron was a gifted German actor and director, known worldwide for starring alongside Marlene Dietrich in The Blue Angel, 1930. He was also a respected cabaret performer, with a sharp wit and stage presence that defined Berlin's vibrant pre-war culture. As a Jew in Nazi Germany, however, Gerron's life changed overnight. He fled to the Netherlands, but after the German invasion, he was interned at Westerbork and later sent to their Theresienstadt. There, under SS orders, he was forced to direct a propaganda film portraying the camp as humane. Once filming ended, Gerron and his wife were deported to Auschwitz. On October 15, 1944, he was murdered in the gas chambers. He has no known grave, but memorials in Berlin and Amsterdam honor his name. Gerron's story is one of artistic brilliance extinguished, a man used by propaganda only to be destroyed by the very system he resisted. Karel Hassler was a beloved Czech singer, songwriter, and film actor, often called the man with the guitar. His films and ballads captured the humor and spirit of Prague between the wars. Known for satirical and patriotic songs, Hassler used his art to uplift people during dark times. But under Nazi occupation, his defiance made him a target. In 1941, Hassler was arrested by the Gestapo for spreading anti-German sentiment through his music. He was deported to Mauthausen concentration camp, where he endured forced labor and brutal conditions. In December 1941, guards deliberately left him exposed to freezing weather. He died soon after, at 62. Though his body was never returned, a memorial bust now stands on Petrin Hill in Prague, overlooking the city he loved. Hassler's voice was silenced by war, but his songs remain part of Czech national memory, echoing with resilience and quiet resistance. Henry Gleditsch was a leading figure in Norway's theatre world, both as an actor and as director of Trondelag Theater in Trondheim. His productions balanced entertainment with sharp social commentary, which drew the attention of the occupying German authorities. Gleditsch refused to close his theater or censor his plays, seeing culture as a weapon of resistance. In October 1942, martial law was declared in Trondheim after the assassination of a Nazi police official. As part of the reprisals, German forces executed prominent Norwegians to intimidate the public. Gleditsch was arrested and shot at Falstadskogen, a forest execution site, on October 6, 1942. He was just 47 years old. Today, a memorial plaque in Trondheim and his grave at Varfru churchyard honor his sacrifice. Gleditsch's death exemplifies how theater and art became acts of defiance, and how a stage director paid with his life for his courage. Rolf Wenchoz was immortalized as the young Emil in the 1931 classic Emil and the Detectives. His role as a plucky Berlin schoolboy made him a symbol of youthful adventure and optimism in Germany's early sound cinema. However, like many of his generation, Wenchoz was soon swept up by war. When the Second World War began, he joined the Luftwaffe as a flight officer. On January 31, 1942, his plane was shot down off the Irish coast during a mission. He was only 24 years old. His body was lost to the sea, and he has no known grave, but his name is remembered in German war casualty lists. Rolf Wenchoz represents the countless young men whose artistic promise was cut short. From film sets to battlefields, his journey illustrates how war stole not only lives, but also the future of cinema itself. Hannes Stelzer was an Austrian film star of the late 1930s and early 1940s, remembered for his charismatic screen presence in romantic dramas and adventure films. His career thrived during the years when cinema served both as escapism and propaganda for audiences living through turbulent times. But like many actors of his generation, his fate became inseparable from war. Stelzer was conscripted into the Luftwaffe during World War II, serving as a pilot. On December 27, 1944, tragedy struck when his aircraft crashed on the Eastern Front, reportedly during combat operations. He was just 35 years old. Though he had enjoyed celebrity status, his life ended in the anonymity of wartime skies. Buried in a military grave, Stelzer's story reflects how even the most glamorous figures of European cinema were not spared from the brutal machinery of war, their talents lost in service to conflict. Alexander Wegiurko was a respected Polish actor, director, and theater manager, known for his commitment to bringing classical and modern plays to audiences. His passion for art was matched by his sense of duty when World War II engulfed his homeland. After the German-Soviet invasion of Poland in 1939, Wegiurko found himself navigating a shattered cultural landscape. He continued performing in Soviet-occupied territories, but in 1941, as the German-Soviet frontlines shifted, he was caught in the chaos of war. While traveling near Minsk, he was killed under circumstances that remain partially unclear, most likely as a result of German military action. Wegiurko was just 40 years old. He is remembered in Białystok, where the Alexander Wegiurko Drama Theatre carries his name, keeping his artistic legacy alive. His story is one of culture silenced by violence, yet honored in the very institutions he helped shape. Eugeniusz Bodo was one of interwar Poland's brightest stars, an actor, director, and singer beloved for his comedy, charm, and versatility. He was hailed as the Polish Fred Astaire, lighting up films and cabarets in Warsaw throughout the 1930s. When war came in 1939, Bodo's career collapsed under occupation, but his spirit remained unbroken. Attempting to escape Nazi-occupied Poland, he fled eastward, only to fall into Soviet hands. In 1940, he was arrested by the NKVD, accused of espionage. He was sent to a gulag near Arkhangelsk, where the brutal cold and forced labor broke his health. He died in 1943 at just 43 years old, buried in an unmarked grave. For decades, rumors claimed the Nazis had killed him, until archives revealed the truth. Today, Bodo remains a symbol of Polish cultural brilliance destroyed by totalitarianism, his films cherished as echoes of a stolen future. Witold Zakarowicz was a young Polish film actor whose career showed immense promise before the outbreak of war. Known for his performances in romantic dramas and comedies of the late 1930s, he was admired for his striking looks and talent. When the war began, Zakarowicz chose courage over safety, becoming involved in underground resistance work. In 1940, he was arrested by the Gestapo and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. There, he endured forced labor and starvation, but remained steadfast in spirit. In February 1943, at only 28 years old, he was murdered in Auschwitz. His body was never returned, but his name is commemorated on memorials to Polish war victims. Zakarowicz's story embodies the tragedy of a generation of young actors. Lives and careers cut short before they could truly flourish, silenced in the very years when they might have defined Polish cinema's golden age. Kazimierz Janasa Stepowski was a veteran of Polish theater and cinema, one of the most respected actors of his time. His long career spanned silent films, early talkies, and stage performances that earned him the title of a master craftsman of Polish drama. But the German occupation of Warsaw placed even revered figures in grave danger. On July 10, 1943, during the brutal years of Nazi rule, Janasa Stepowski was caught in tragic circumstances when German forces raided his Warsaw apartment. He was shot and killed at the age of 60. His grave lies in Puławski Cemetery, where fellow artists and admirers have honored his memory for decades. Unlike younger stars whose careers had barely begun, Janasa Stepowski's legacy was already established. His death served as a painful reminder that war did not discriminate by age or achievement. Even Poland's most celebrated cultural figures were not spared. Igor Sim was a striking Polish-Austrian actor of the 1920s and 1930s, remembered for his charm and presence on screen. But with the outbreak of World War II, Sim's legacy took a darker turn. When Germany occupied Warsaw, he collaborated with the Nazi regime, working as a Gestapo agent and even directing propaganda activities against his fellow Poles. His betrayal made him a target for the Polish resistance. On March 7, 1941, Sim was assassinated in his Warsaw apartment by members of the Underground Home Army. He was only 44. He was buried in Puławski Cemetery, though his grave is rarely visited compared to other actors of his generation. Sim's story stands as a grim cautionary tale. While many artists resisted oppression, others became entangled in collaboration. His life and death demonstrate the harsh moral choices faced by actors in wartime Europe, with consequences written in blood. Aribert Moog was a German film actor active during the late silent and early sound era, best known for his appearances in patriotic and adventure films of the 1930s. Like many in his profession, he was drawn into the service of the Reich during World War II. His career was cut short when he was drafted into the Wehrmacht. In 1941, Moog was killed while serving on the Eastern Front. He was only 36 years old. His grave lies in a military cemetery, one among millions of German soldiers who perished in the brutal campaign. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Moog left behind no major iconic role, yet his story resonates as part of a lost generation of actors whose talents never had the chance to mature. His brief career and violent death reflect how war eroded not just nations, but the cultural fabric of European cinema itself. Harry Liedtke was one of the great stars of German silent cinema, known for his romantic leads opposite icons like Marlene Dietrich and Henny Porten. With his good looks and refined style, Liedtke epitomized the charm of pre-war German film. By the 1940s, his career had faded, yet he remained a respected figure in German cultural life. In April 1945, as the Red Army advanced into Germany, Liedtke was living in Bad Saro near Berlin. During the violent final days of the war, Soviet soldiers entered his home. Liedtke and his wife were killed during the chaos, victims of a conflict that spared no one. He was 67 years old. Liedtke was buried locally, and his name remains on lists of German film pioneers. His tragic death symbolizes how even legends of the screen, who had entertained millions, became anonymous casualties in Europe's darkest hour. Hans Broswetter was a popular German actor of the silent and early sound film era. His youthful energy and versatile acting won him roles in comedies and dramas throughout the 1920s and 1930s. Although his career slowed with the rise of the Nazi regime, he continued to work in German cinema into the war years. By 1945, Berlin was under constant bombardment as Allied air raids devastated the city. On April 29, 1945, Broswetter was killed in his apartment during one of the final bombings of the German capital. He was 44 years old. He was laid to rest in Berlin, but like many whose lives ended in the ruins of the city, his grave became a quiet reminder of war's indiscriminate destruction. Broswetter's story is emblematic of countless artists whose lives were reduced from silver screen fame to footnotes in history by the violence of war. Joachim Gottschalk was one of Germany's most admired romantic leads of the late 1930s, winning audiences with his sensitive performances and screen charisma. Yet his personal life put him on a collision course with Nazi racial policies. Gottschalk was married to a Jewish woman, Meta, with whom he had a son. Despite pressure from officials to divorce, he refused. In November 1941, Nazi authorities ordered his wife and child to report for deportation. Rather than see his family torn apart and sent to concentration camps, Gottschalk chose a final act of defiance. On November 6, 1941, he and his wife and son took their own lives in their Berlin apartment. He was only 37. Gottschalk was buried at Stahnsdorf Cemetery, where admirers still bring flowers. His tragic end remains one of the most poignant stories of German cinema, a man who chose love and loyalty over survival.